I forgot to record the meeting. So we won't have the approval of the agenda, which was unanimous on the 23rd and tabled on the 16th. We will, however, discuss the proposed amendments to land use ordinance section 9.3.12, cluster housing and planned unit development. You should have the information that Tad sent out concerning the clustered housing.
These were changes that were made as a result of the February 2nd meeting, Mr. Chairman,
Okay,
dated February 9th. And I think we didn't get very far in them. I've made the amendments that you folks wanted, except I noticed that I didn't include the mandatory cluster subdivision redefinition, which I pulled out of the minutes. Which basically said, hold on. Basically, that was written out. I'll put that in the copy, but it was, you had changed it after you folks had gone over it to all residential subdivisions or 5 lots or more shall be clustered in accordance with section 9.3.12, unless the planning board determines that an alternative design is more appropriate for conformance with the terrain, septic and soil suitability, space preservation and conservation of rural landscapes as defined in the Arundel Comprehensive Plan.
which section was that, Tad?
That was 4.5, section 4.5. That was just the definition of a mandatory cluster subdivision.
That's what it had said.
Oh,
The
that's-
existing.
What you guys approved of saying on the second word that you had recommended.
Okay, 5 or more lots. I like that.
It was contingent upon a variety of factors, including performance with the terrain, soil suitability, open space preservation, and conservation of rural landscapes as defined by the Arundel Conservation, Arundel Comprehensive Plan.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm gonna look at this and assume if we start at the top.
Yeah,
So yeah, the mandatory cluster here currently reads of more than 4 lots, which we are changing to 5.
5 or more. Means the same thing, but I
Right.
think it's clearer, more understandable.
Yeah, I agree. You know, if it's 5 or more lots, it's clustered. That's an easier way of saying more than 4.
Yeah,
We're being
yeah.
rather specific, which I think is a good thing. But then the next section down, we're taking out the dimensional exceptions, and we have 2 options. Is that correct, Ted?
No, we're not taking out dimensional exemptions. We have a new definition of exemptions, of dimensional exemptions. We're deleting the existing language. and
Right.
All cluster and PUD development shall conform to the standards of the Arundel subdivision regulations, but can be exempt from the minimum lot size, property line setbacks, and street frontage required by the land use ordinance. Lot sizes may be reduced, however, the total area of the lot reduction below the zoning minimum shall be transferred into dedicated and common open space. In the R3 and RC districts, the amount of dedicated open space shall equal or exceed 50% of the net residential acreage calculated for the development.
That was
That's
one
option
option,
1.
but we're choosing between option 1 and option 2, correct?
Yeah, I mean, option 1 is, that would be option 1. And Basically, the difference between the two are twofold. Get both these things together at the same time. The issue with option one is that we're saying that's 50% of the net residential acreage, which is what had been recommended by the comp plan and what had been nebulous in the subdivision ordinance. And the issue is either it's going to be 50% of the total property or 50% of the net residential acreage. That would mean 50% of the land that doesn't have wetlands, roads, or other encumbrances like steep slopes would have to go to open space. Means whatever's left over, half of that's open space from the get-go, and the other half will be lots. So it's a pretty aggressive requirement that was in the subdivision ordinance. It's still in the subdivision ordinance, but it never really says what it is. And I think we talked a little bit about this on the second, about how, should we do net residential or should we not? So option one is basically saying that it's net residential density, 50% of the leftover land has to be used for open space. Option two says, no, it's the gross acreage, which is pretty much what we've been doing. But it basically makes it clear which one you have to calculate. And the issue for the board is, which one do you prefer, given the potential, impact? If you have a situation like, the issue that the board had with several other developments we've had recently has been that we have projects in which half the land or more than half the land is in a shoreline zone. It's unusable or it cannot be developed. And therefore, automatically, half of that land, or even greater the amount of that land, is already is unusable. And then that unusable, undevelopable area is just dedicated for open space. And the board had expressed concern about that in the past, if you recall. The real issue for you was, shall we do that? Shall we require more? Shall we be more aggressive and require more open space? Or that is usable open space? I think that was the issue we had talked about, was usable open space that can be used by the residents. It can be used for or whatever. If it's all wetlands, it's kind of difficult to use that for recreational purposes, even passive recreational purposes, without making some accommodation for walking in there or some other kind of activity.
And I think for me, that's the big issue. We've seen a lot of development where we're given land that is dedicated open space, but it can't be used for anything. You can't put trails in there. You can't put a playground in there. It kind of restricts. I think it makes fun of the intent, which was to create open space that was usable for something.
You can use it for a mud rally.
Except that we can't have mud rallies because you can't get a conditional use permit for it.
Well, no, what I'm saying is for the residents. But the other thing that I was looking at along the way, which I thought we discussed, was about the soils and drainage. So we aren't building on top of one another for future if we have poor soils. I mean,
Right. But that's going to be in another section.
but I'm just saying that should also be related to this on which way we go. And since there's only 4 of us instead of the other 3, I would almost say at this time, wait until we have more opinion.
Yeah, I can argue with that.
It's a valid point, Marty, because it takes 4 of us to have a quorum. But on something like this, it might be a good idea if we had at least one other person.
that's what I'm saying is, so it's not lopsided. I mean, it just barely squeaked by. Well, if we have more, then it's just not somebody's idea just to get something by.
And that will work for something like this when we're discussing the land use ordinance. But if we had an applicant in front of us, we've got a quorum, we'd have to go with the quorum.
I realize that,
Yeah.
but I'm saying
But
for,
no, I'm agreeing with you, Marty. In this instance, that will work well to say, but we can still have the discussion and find out where people come down. I like the idea of net residential acreage personally. Because you're gonna have to leave some open space that is usable
open space,
for something.
usable open space.
And that's what we require for every type of development. We require the net usable acreage. After they subtract the wetlands and roads and everything else, then what's left, we base the percentage on what's buildable. But there's like a little loophole here, and I don't know if it's necessarily wrong, but there is a loophole that they're including the entire acreage and dividing that up. Yeah, I think the one benefit we get is they will be deeding that as open space, so it remains open space forever, rather than just divide it up. So there's a slight advantage, but I think it is a little loophole that's been used.
I think we lost
Lost
Jamie.
Jamie.
He was struggling with his audio video. I don't know if he's gonna try to log back in or not.
That would not be good.
No, if he is gone, this meeting is over.
Boy. Oh, March has really turned out to be beautiful, hasn't it?
Coming in like a lion.
Oh, yeah, I know. They worked all day. We couldn't get anything done. The killer. Well, Jamie's not here. I will throw out one other thing, though. Also, you'll notice that there were two districts in this. I originally had put the R3, I cited both the R3 and the RC districts because as the board is aware, the R3 districts in the 2007 comp plan was considered to be, and it's still cited as being rural residential, which means it's supposed to be subdivisions that preserve rural character and rural landscape. However, during the execution, and that was in the 2007, in the execution of that, of those objectives, what happened was that the ordinance never really did anything much differently in terms of design or design requirements or setbacks or something that would help create more of a rural subdivision lot, rural looking subdivision lot, one would assume. That really wasn't executed very well in the ordinance, and consequently, when the comp plan committee looked at it and looked at the distinction between the R2 and the R3, they didn't see much distinction except for two land uses that were different. One was sawmills and one was campground, and so they made the recommendation that the R2 and the R3 districts be merged into one R2 district, which is suburban residential. And the issue that I guess will always come back to the planning board, which we haven't addressed, keep kind of sidestepping this, is the issue of, is R3 going to be combined with R2, or are we going to try to make some real changes to the R3 district, some design requirements and setback requirements to achieve the original 2007 concept of having a lot that's more rural looking and preserves more rural character than the subdivision, the suburban subdivision lot that we have in R2.
So, I think that's probably something that we need to deal with. But for now, since it is a separate, it is in the the ordinance as its own district. I think we should leave R3 in there. That's my take,
So that
until
would,
we do something about it.
so that would mean then the R3 and the R2, since it says in the rural districts, and that has rural in its name. And if you recall, when we were required in order to get the ordinance through, we had to eliminate our categories of business, rural, and residential, and we had to mix them all together, if you recall, in order to get the changes to the ordinance done. So we've lost our distinctions of what a rural district is, and it's we should stop trying to use that term and cite specific districts. So
Okay.
that argument of whether or not we categorize things as rural or non-rural. just
So we have had a lot of sub-developments in the R2 district. And they were required to be clustered.
Yeah.
I just thought that R2 would be fit into this requirement.
Well, and that's the issue, because it, the 50%, it said, basically the subdivision ordinance says in rural districts, 50% of the net residential area has got to be dedicated to open space.
Okay, I see. So right now it says all developments everywhere have to be clustered, but the rural zones have to be dedicated common space,
You have to have at least 50%
50%. Okay,
in open space.
all
That's
right,
that's the difference
Question,
in the other districts.
okay.
question,
Yeah, Marty, hang on just for a sec.
okay.
You were saying, Tom?
No, so the difference between R1, R2 versus R3 and RC is the 50% dedicated acreage. It's a 50%. That's
Yeah.
what I, okay,
That's the question. Do we do that to the R3 as we do the rural district or the RC district? Or do we just leave it for the RC district alone?
well,
Question.
excuse me, Marty,
I'm
this
sorry.
would end up distinguishing it from R2. This would want to be one of the things that would separate it.
Yep. And that's, you don't have to make a decision tonight, but that's something to think about, because we have not really taken on the R2, R3 issue. And if we do say they should say separate, we're going to be in a position where we're not in accordance with the comp plan. Because the comp plan said those two should be the same district, which greatly increases the amount of suburban residential we're going to have in the community. I would suggest if the planning board is really intent on creating a rural residential district that is 2 acres, I don't think you're going to be able to bump it up to 3, quite frankly. I think that there are certain setbacks and design standards that would have to go along with that in order to distinguish it from the R2. And also probably some other uses in there that are different from the R2.
Well, I think it would be beneficial to a developer in R3. Right now, is R3, is that 2 acres or 3 acres?
That's 2 acres.
2 acres? Okay. So I guess it probably wouldn't matter. I thought it was 3 acres.
You can see if it was 2 acres, what would happen in the R2 versus R3 if it was if you're required to have 50% of your net residential acreage, then you have, sorry, Chris, I'm in a meeting. Then you would have a situation where the R2 would certainly be, you'd probably have larger lots than you would in the R3. The question is more like rural character? I guess that's one of the questions you have to ask.
Oh,
Question again, please.
Yeah, Marty?
All right. Along the way of R3 and R4, I thought we were going to have a clarification by the comprehensive plan because I thought they were going to combine the zone or something other. And if they're combining the zone, then we have to have that before we can decide on this altogether.
Probably.
Because it was unclear or it was going to be discussed along the way. Correct me if I'm wrong.
I don't think there was a discussion about combining the R3 and R4. There was about the R2 and the R3. And we just
Okay,
haven't
I mean,
moved on that yet.
I'm just saying, if there was a discussion, they have to make supposedly their decision so that we're not overriding them.
Oh, okay, you mean the comp plan was having the,
Yes,
okay,
that's
I
where
misunderstood your point.
that's where I'm trying to go at is the idea of for clarification or anything else before we go this way.
I would take the position, Marty, that since the comp plan is not meeting now, they
They
finished,
haven't been asked to meet.
that's right. They have not been asked to meet since they finished the comp plan back in what, 15?
Uh,
So since they finished that comp plan, they have not been asked to meet. So whether they want to have a discussion about R3 or R4 or anything else is a moot point. It doesn't affect what we're dealing with right now, which is the 2015 comp plan that discusses merging R2 and R3.
They may get their panties caught in a bunch.
I would fail to understand why, because they're not a formal committee right now. They're not in session.
Just point of interest. That's all I'm saying.
Oh, yeah, no, I understand that. And
I do want to point out, I was just looking at the zoning map, and I don't see all that many large acreage in R3 anyway, so it seems like it may not make a difference in what we do with R3. Might be maybe 4 or 5 that are more than 10 acres, 4 or 5 properties. I don't see any that are like 20 or more acres. So it might be a moot point.
Could be a moot point.
Yeah.
Could be a moot point. So the issue there would be, I think, I'm sorry, I think maybe raising this issue really is going to be a distraction at this point, because we haven't settled the R3, RC district. We haven't settled the R3, R2 issue. So
Yeah.
I think that given that, I think we should just restrict this question to the RC district alone. And whether or not we should go by 50% as required by the comp plan in the rural district, and we'll assume that's the RC for the moment. Whether that should be net or gross. And that's really the question. It's a big question.
Yeah,
now, given that you can't build in the shoreland zone, but there are, if there's property that if it were not in the shoreland zone would be buildable. I'm wondering whether or not it would be useful to use that as part of the open space calculation.
You mean the setback?
Yes. You know, it's almost like we could say, okay, in the RC zone, if buildable land is located in the setback, then we will allow you to, you can't build there, but you can use it for the calculation of net developable land and include that in the 50% calculation. You understand what I'm saying, Ted?
Yeah, I do. So it would have to be buildable land.
It would have to be buildable land, yes.
Buildable but usable instead of mud.
The issue though is, well, that's true. And the issue is, if we look at the, well, here's the point. Right now, we don't base net residential density on the setbacks. We don't say it that you have to exclude shoreland zone. We say you have to exclude anything that's, any hydric soils, water courses, streams, or water bodies. That's essentially what we're saying.
Oh, okay.
We're not saying it's shoreland zone. So that shoreland zone area that is limited in its use is not excluded from the density calculation. It can be included.
Okay. Yeah, that would solve the question I would have, because it would still end up in open space. It might actually result in maybe one more house in a cluster. I don't know.
Oh, it probably would. Yeah. It probably would. If you look, I hate to keep coming back to Arundel Keep. I don't mean to pick on those guys, but they're the most recent example that we have. And they have a very large 250-foot shoreline zone area that runs through the entire property. It's like a belt across the middle of that property. And you'll know, actually, it's more than that. It even goes up to the northeast portion of the whole property. That's a large piece of land that is taken out of development capabilities, and they're actually being compensated in a sense for the loss by clustering. So if you have a wetlands that is resource protection district, actually it's almost to your benefit from the standpoint of that 250-foot setback will give you extra density and will not be deducted as part of net residential density calculation. So there's a big advantage. As we discovered in Arundel's Keep, again, they had a large piece of that land, a large swath of land that was not developable, but it was included in net residential density, so they were able to get greater density, or they were able to get more lots, let's put it that way. Because if you did a normal as I said, a normal 3-acre lot alignment along Irving Road, you'd only be able to get 5 lots, maybe 6 at the most, and they were able to get 8. So, anyways, so we're gonna basically what you're saying, Mr. Chairman, is that we're gonna defer on the net versus gross residential acreage question until we have 5 members in attendance.
Yes, at least 5.
Well, that would take us on to the real fun part, which is number C, which is going to be minimum lot sizes. I switched up the order here, gentlemen. So
Okay.
I didn't finish this because plus power again. But I think in the one I gave you, if you go to, all right, let's stick with what you guys have. You have the next one is minimum acreage, which we've already talked about. That's minimum of 6 acres. I think we're all in agreement on that one, or we're not. Oh,
You skipped over the minimum lot size.
Minimum lot sizes. Okay, we'll keep going with that. So minimum lot sizes, we have 2 options in that. Option number 1 is a verbal description that gives a great deal of flexibility and discretion to the planning board. Basically, it says that the planning board determines the minimum lot size on a whole bunch of factors, including the conformance with the natural contours of the land, usable lot area, privacy, soil stability, and suitability for septic disposal, adequate locations for primary and reserve septic fields in relation to well locations, setback from roads, topography, and buffers from incompatible uses or views. And the lot configuration shall be designed to permit adequate space for septic system, well, and usable lot area of reasonable size surrounding the dwelling unit location. So it's very loose. It's very discretionary. saying that the planning board basically can agree or not agree with how the layout is performed, and can determine the lot sizes based on conditions on the land. It requires the planning board to do a lot of intense work and looking at those properties and seeing if they're large enough for the soils. And it gives you a wide variety of variables in determining what that minimum lot size is. The second option, which we've actually kind of attached ourselves to, is that we do it on a basic of carrying capacity of the soils on the property to process effluent and to recharge the groundwater. And this is when this one gets very complex and can get very, very complex depending on how much we go with it. There are two ways to do it. One way is to require a minimum lot size of good soil, of soil that's moderate, that is what's the definition we had? I think we had, what moderately drained or better, moderately drained to excessively drained soils, at least 20,000 square feet of that, which is the minimum lot size for a septic system in the state of Maine. And then that has to be a contiguous set of soils to ensure that we have a place to put a house, septic system, and a well. And then the rest of the lot size would be based on the amount of carrying capacity in those soils, what types of soils we have. Or more importantly, we would do a factor. I think Jamie had talked about increasing or decreasing the amount of that we can do based on based essentially on the type of soils that we've classified. I think you saw that I put together that chart that you requested of York County soil drainage classifications of what is poorly drained and very poorly drained, somewhat poorly drained, moderately, and well drained. And that's in the charts that are on the page. Those I think are on page
Three.
three? Yeah.
Yep.
Page 2, I'm sorry. And those basically, we looked at, okay, we're gonna do it based on a percentage of lot size that you can reduce the minimum lot size if you have a moderately drained soil by 40%, which means that, if you have a 3-acre lot, you can reduce it by 40%. If you have a 2-acre lot, again, 40%. 1 acre, it'll still make it at 40% if you have the decent soils.
No, because then because it would be what?
40% would be more than the 20,000.
Right, it'd bring it down to 24,000 square feet.
Yes, but isn't 1 acre for 44,000, 42,000, 1 acre?
Yeah, 43,560.
Yeah, but if you also look on page 4, at the top of the page, it says minimum acreage of the thing unit development shall be 6 acres.
Oh, that's for the whole parcel that you're dividing.
But again, we were talking about the New Hampshire guidelines, as you set into the soil, so that we have future, so we don't get into another Duck Brook or anything else. So we're not tasting each other's salt along the way for future development. I mean, this is one of the things that, if I remember correctly, where we have a problem or could be a problem, that we want to try to eliminate it for the future of drainage and everything else. So why don't we look at our eyes that way and start the prevention of it instead of working with what we have now and everything else?
Well, and then what we have, Marty, here is 2 options, even in this. Option number 1 is to go with the percentage of reduction that you can have in a lot, assuming that you have 20,000 square feet of good land.
That's a half acre.
Half acre of decent land. So we aren't going to get anything that's a half acre all the time. That you're going to get more than a half acre, which is which is good, extremely good in the 3 acre zones. In the 2 acre zones, it's still pretty good. In the 1 acre zone, you're getting a deal. But going down to 20,000 square feet in some of these 1 acre zones, I think we're getting into real trouble because we don't have a lot of really good soils for that.
Or future soil.
Now that's one way to do it. The second way to do it is if we can copy the New Hampshire system, which is actually quite a bit more complex. If you look at,
Complex is one thing, but longevity is complex.
yep, that's true. Well, if we adopt their system, then it's going to be, we're going to be doing rezoning throughout the whole town. The reason why I say that, you saw those charts. They give you a minimum, the maximum amount of square footage that you can get, or I should say the minimum lot square footage, based on the soil type and based on the topography. So
Yeah,
basically,
topography, you got ledge. I mean, you aren't going to get much drainage there.
well, yeah, well, the issue isn't just, remember, they're not just dealing with effluent, they're also dealing with recharge of groundwater. Something we've always been concerned about with wells. You know, our requirement is also make sure that the project will not have an adverse impact upon wells. Well, recharge, as well as septic, one of the big issues is also get groundwater recharge back into the well field. And then the issue is, and what New Hampshire did is they looked at the soils, not only from a standpoint of being able to process effluent, but the ability of that particular type of soil to also recharge the underlying aquifer, be it a ledge, or basically a fractured ledge aquifer, or a granular sand and gravel aquifer, or some combination thereof. So they're always concerned about both those things, and their formula, that rather complex system that we saw in the documents I sent you, really are very, very complex, and we are not going to find ourselves with clustered lots as a result. In the 3 acre zones, sure. When we get down to a 1 acre zone, you'll see that some of the soils that are actually quite prevalent in this town require to have at least 2 acres. And that includes areas of the R1 district or the 1 acre zone, which is not going to fit that particular model that the state of New Hampshire is given. And also the thing is, you can't make it just say, okay, well, you need 47,000 for this lot, you need, for this type of soil, you need 58,000 all the way up to 120,000 based on the soil. Well, the problem is that no lot is just one type of soil. There's all sorts of soils in there. You can have a combination of soils in there. And how do you deal with that? And then there's also gradient, or the topography. You know, the greater the soil, the less the amount of groundwater recharge on the site. You're not going to get it because it's flowing downhill because of gravity. So
Here's a question. Now, overall, this summer was a very dry summer. How many, or do we know? We may not know. How many actually people ran into problems with their wells of not being able to be proficient?
I don't know. I've heard of a number of places that they did have serious problems. One of the reasons was jug wells. And they were
I'm just using that as a
figures.
basis.
I have no idea. I just heard more anecdotal information this summer than I've heard before.
Can we gather that, or is it available, or am I pulling at straws?
I think the only way we could get that is to do a survey, to put out a questionnaire, because I don't believe the state had any data on it.
Now, the state doesn't have anything to do with it. I'm talking about the town of Arundel.
I understand that, but we didn't record, nor does anybody report whether they're having a well problem to us, unless they're coming in and requesting. Well, they don't even have to get a drilling permit. No, the town of Arundel does not give out permits for wells. The only time we consider a well is when in a subdivision, whether the well is sufficiently far away from the septic system to meet the plumbing code. That's the only
Yeah.
time.
The other question that I have is, and I may be pulling at a straw or anything else, usable drinking water without the factor of underground contamination. Because the fact is, everybody wants to start pulling to go so green, 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 and good water, which I just seen on the news. How does that affect us?
Are you talking about salt or problems with salt, or are you talking about
No.
problems with effluent?
Yes.
I don't have a good idea of what our problems are with effluent at this time. I know that we have contamination of surface waters in the watershed. We have evidence of that. We have suspicions of where that's coming from, but we don't have clear evidence of that at that time. That is why there is a second application being prepared to with DEP to the EPA for funding to start tracking down exactly what these point sources are, or these areas with non-point source pollution are, so we can pinpoint what's the problem and how we can solve that problem.
Or the state solve the problem.
Well,
It's not necessarily the town to solve the problem,
yeah, but it's
but I
the
mean,
partnership.
they danced and they danced around and around on it, and they have not given us any answers. And
They don't have any answers right now.
I
They have-
know, but I'm just saying, I'm I'm just thinking of safe drinking water, not the iron, not the salt. I mean, salt you can be resolved at an expense or anything else, but uh, look at what we had also at the school with the arsenic or whatever else. Not, I mean, I'm just thinking the safety of our now and our future residents. I may be going too far looking on the dream sheet, but I'm just babbling.
Well, I think you're echoing what you said the last time, that your greatest concern is environmental quality, and whether or not, we have to be careful when we do clustering that we don't compromise water quality as a result of that. I think that's what I'm getting from you. And perhaps we haven't been as concerned about water quality, especially groundwater quality, because we really haven't stressed it, and we haven't pushed it too hard with our development, because it's very difficult to make some of these determinations on a case-by-case basis in these developments. We don't ask certain questions because we don't have systems to ask those questions. We don't know. We don't have baseline information about a lot of stuff, and we're getting it because we have a problem in our watersheds.
But we can't play dumb on it.
Can't play dumb. No, I think the planning board has been very proactive about this. And I mean, you did this a couple of years ago when you recognized that there was evidence that we might be having some surface water contamination because of development, which is why you created your stream protection district, where you really didn't have one in this
But
town.
it also is just not us; it's throughout the state.
Yep, and in our case, it's really the Kennebunk watershed and the Saco River watershed.
Well, no, I'm talking about up north. They even have it. Not just meaning York County, Cumberland County. Up other counties are also having the issues also. So it's not just us, it's overall. Do you agree or disagree, Tom?
Yeah,
If I'm talking too much, tell me so.
You're not, I'll agree, Marty, it is a statewide issue. But we can only address Arundel. And how do we,
Correct.
what do we want to do about the hand that we've been dealt? I like the tables, actually. And I think it's a reasonable accommodation to say, if you've got very poorly drained soil, then you're not gonna get any kind of a reduction on that particular soil. And the thing I like about it is that we then go on and say, well, what is very poorly drained soil? And I know that this is terrible, but I grew up in this area, and the very first thing I saw was Biddeford, and I thought to myself, yeah, well, that qualifies. And I grew up in Biddeford, so I can pick on them.
It is it's a mucky soil.
It is. But I think it's nice that we look at it and we say, from my perspective, do we think somewhat poorly drained should be, you're not allowed to, you're not going to get any percentage of a reduction, is 50% of well-drained soil a good number to work with?
Yes, but don't forget, Biddeford also have a water structure.
Yeah, he was,
But it was a joke, Marty. And we look at the different kinds of soils and say, I think it's a reasonable effort to say, let's try to address it based upon the soil. What do we have?
That's show and tell.
Yeah, pretty much, and we're gonna be asking them to tell us what kind of water or what kind of soil they have. We can also ask them questions, and Tad's correct. I don't think there's any data to be able to use, although Jamie might know of some. What's the refresh rate on the aquifer?
depends on the soil.
I would hate to
Depends on
have
how much
something.
they're pumping.
Well, I'd hate to have something show up like it did down at Pinecrest when the residents come in and say, you can't build anymore. We're only getting 3 gallons a minute now. You build any more, we're going to drain the aquifer completely.
Yeah.
We need to avoid that issue. So we've got to find some way to determine what the refresh rate is. And I don't know how to do that. I don't know if, I don't even know if it can be done.
It can be. If you go back to the New Hampshire soil scientists, basically their soil-based lot sizing, that document that I sent to you guys, it's an older document. I mean, it was dated September 2003, and they have this system which apparently they do. I haven't worked in New Hampshire in a long time, so I don't know. I haven't had to go through this, but from the looks of it, they have been enacting this statewide, and one of the big issues they have in there is basing lot sizes, as I said, not only on the septic effluent, but really on recharge, local recharge of the aquifer, the local reach of the local aquifer. And there's been, if you look at what they do, they go through a very complex system where they do estimated recharge as a major factor. For instance, soils that are coarse grained, that are excessively drained, they give that a very high mark. They let that have a lesser amount of those kind of soils can have, if they're on a 0 to 8% slope. The minimum lot size for that is 31,000.
What size?
31,000, which is
3/4 of an acre.
yeah, 3/4 of an acre. My concern, having worked in deep soil or stratified drift landscapes in the past, we were always concerned about concentrate, with very granular material like Adams soils, in which the water just flows right through, it just pours right through, percolates very quickly. The concern there is, well, is it treating the nitrates? Is it binding up any of the? Is it treating first of all, the biologics, and second of all, what's it doing with the nitrates? Are they just pouring right through into the aquifer down below? In New Hampshire, they put a lot of stock in very granular soils, which is interesting because they seem to be just as interested in groundwater recharge there.
Should we look into it more?
Well, I think, yeah, we've got two systems here that we got to argue about. I mean, the first one is, I think you what I've heard is you guys are pretty much interested in not keeping it loosey-goosey like it is, where we just talk about the factors that we can consider, but actually coming up with some sort of reliable and replicable system of determining minimum lot sizes based on soils. And we're gonna have to start getting a little more serious about some of the scientific elements of this. And the first one that I presented to you was very kind of loose. It just said, based on these basic categories, you can reduce the lot size when you have moderately drained soils. That's where you get the best. Because I was concerned more with nutrient, especially nitrogen binding, and then it reduces the amount we can do. You can reduce the lot size, steps down and becomes progressively less as you get into the worst soils, either being more excessively drained or very poorly drained. And that's a very simple, coarse way of doing it. The way New Hampshire does it, we're going to have to look at the soils in terms of both those categories, and they have a formula for determining what the minimum lots, what the lot size and what the net residential density is based on the soil recharge and the effluent, based on the categories.
Under your chart, Tad,
Big
as
part-
I'm looking at right here, it doesn't show per se where Arundel stands. It shows Benefit and Saco, Sebago, so on and so forth.
Oh, those are
And just saying as a town, where do we go across the board at?
those are soil types, Marty. They're named after many soil types are named after towns. As Bedford is. And
Yeah, I realize that there's many types of so and everything else, but where does Arundel stand on that chart?
We're all over the place.
we have all those soils. We have all those soils. We even have sulfahemus, which is where are basically salt marsh wetlands. We have those. We probably don't have we have a lot of Rainham, Naumburg, and Rumney, less Rumney, Scantic. And you'll notice we also have two types of Naumburgs. We have some Elmwoods, Madawaska, some Buxtons, very little musk Buxtons, mainly Krogan. Krogan and Naumburg are a complex in our area. We have very little Adams. We have some Hermit. We have Lyman, but our Lyman has a tendency to be Lyman very stony or very rocky, shallow to bedrock soils. I'm somewhat confused why that's up there as somewhat excessively drained, mainly because it's got a lot of granular material in it. And we have Marlow, which, by the way, is the official soil of New Hampshire, strangely enough. And we have Beckett. But I have to have them all in there because you never know when you're going to come up with one of these soils in Arundel. These are the basic soils that we have in York County, and I put the ones that are in York County specifically because I can't trust I really can't trust the SCS medium intensity soil maps because they are good indicators, but they're not absolute. And there are subdivisions, and when I say subdivisions, there are certain of these soils that may exist in Arundel that haven't been mapped by the medium intensity soil survey that was done back in the 70s.
Now, here's another dumb question. When they do a test pit, how deep is a test pit?
Well, the best way to do it is 7 feet, quite frankly, but that's what I used to do.
But the soil can change after 7 feet.
It's not that deep, because in Arundel, I shouldn't say in Arundel, in the state of Maine, when you're doing a test pit, not so much for foundation purposes, as you are for determining a septic system suitability. That's
And
what,
we've had enough test pits throughout development along the way. Does that give us any information, or is that pulling straws along the way of,
well, if you remember, if you looked at my report on Arundel's Keep, I discussed some of those test pit logs with you. And because those were sent to you, I requested that from the developer, and he did provide them. And those logs showed that in many cases, they dug down to 50 inches. It was a little over 4 feet. Usually they stop digging when they hit what's called, limiting factor, standing water or ledge. So in some cases, when they do a survey, they use a little auger hand to get an idea of what the soils are, and they usually can tell in the first 2 to 3 feet.
I have another dumb question. So how wide do they go? They do a test pit at one spot, but soils can change 10 feet away.
Yes, they can. Representative, what they do is they'll do a test pit in certain places, and they'll actually dig a hole. And the holes usually, often they use a small backhoe to do that.
yeah, a regular auger, backhoe with an auger?
Could do that. Well, if you go out in the field, it changes over time. You can see places where it's clearly width of a bucket, small bucket. In other places, it is an auger.
The old way was a post hole digger.
Yep. But the thing about that, though, is that the problem with the post hole digger is you're disturbing the stratification of the soil. You use an auger, you pull it up like a core. It's like a coring.
Yeah.
It'll show you the soil that's attached to that auger, and you can see where what you're looking for is the color of the soil, the texture of the soil. You're looking for indications of high water that can be glaying, which is a washing out of the soil. That is, you can also see mottles, which are basically rust bands, if you will, where there's variation in water table. The water comes up, and then the iron oxide, the iron in the soil oxidizes and creates a rust. You see a little brown red streaks through it. Sometimes you'll notice in that soil log from Arundel's Keep, they said few and faint models, meaning that it's not a regular event that the water table gets up that high, or it is not up at that level very long if it's a seasonally high water table. When you get many and distinct, then that indicates this is a regular event, and there is a long that high water table sufficient enough to rust to cause oxidation of some of the rust, the ferrous molecules in the soil. So that's how you do your soil tests. But we're kind of getting a little off the track here. I'm happy to answer these questions, but I think the issue is that we are going to have to do a much more intense formula if we are to use the New Hampshire model. And I'm sure we're going to get a lot of pushback from the soil scientists in the world.
What does the board feel?
That's what I'm asking. Because for me to continue with this, I have to get a feeling for how accurate you want the science to be.
I know, I'm just asking the general
Um,
opinion.
As one of the few board members here, I think we missed, it would have been good to have this in place for other developments recently. Thinking the one on Log Cabin Road. I think there in others, we just have to go by whatever we're told, it seems sometimes. And we hope it works. But this gets a little more specific, because it is a cluster. If they're building closer together, there would be an impact on each other, the abutters. They could be maybe 10,000 square feet of land that they're, maybe 20,000 square feet. And maybe that's not enough for some sites to be able to drain.
That's why I use the word salty water, Tom.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not trying to be
Well,
fresh.
well, yeah, well, it could affect the neighbors, so I think this would help. I don't know if it gets too complex, but I think most developers, they look at this and it all makes sense. When I first saw these charts, I didn't know what it meant because I'm not in that field.
The rest of the board, what do they feel?
At this point, this is what I feel. Jamie cannot get back in, so
Jamie was here.
I know it, but his internet won't let him stay in and we don't have a quorum, so I'm gonna end the meeting.
End the meeting on this discussion.
And end the meeting right now.
No quorum.
No quorum. It's illegal for us to have the meeting.
808.
Yes. Thank you very much. Guys, I
Okay.
appreciate your coming. Paul, thank you very much. Most of the town is having a bad internet day.
Yeah. I was surprised mine was all working. Yeah, I did say my power was out until 6:30. It came on and everything, all my Wi-Fi seemed to work. You might have had a shortage too.
As taxpayers, you'll be thrilled to know that large generator that's in the back of the town hall worked beautifully.
Oh, good.
That is good to know.
Lost power at 3 a.m.
Okay. I'm
So
just, I'm just gonna
you need a
adjourn.
motion?
I'm just gonna adjourn the meeting so I can stop the recording.
Okay. We're done.